The rain does not just fall on Route 9. It attacks the asphalt. It slashes through the darkness like thousands of cold, invisible blades. Inside the cabin of the old 5-ton freighter, the air smells of stale black coffee, diesel grease, and old vinyl. Thomas grips the steering wheel. His knuckles are rough, scarred from decades of shifting gears and fixing frozen brake lines in the dead of winter. The dashboard clock glows a faint, sickly green. 3 minutes past 2 o'clock in the morning. The wipers scrape against the windshield with a heavy, rhythmic groan. Squeak. Toot, toot. Squeak. Thud. Every flash of lightning illuminates the wall of water outside, turning the mountain highway into a black, slippery ribbon hanging over an abyss. Thomas knows this road by heart. He knows where the potholes hide under the muddy puddles. He knows which curves will make the rear tires lose traction if the cargo shifts even an inch. But tonight, the road feels different. It feels heavy with a warning. Suddenly, the high beams catch a shape. A figure is standing directly in the middle of the lane. The white light reflects off a drenched suit coat. The man is waving his arms frantically, his face pale, his mouth open in a silent scream against the storm. Thomas reacts before his mind can think. His right boot hits the air brake pedal. The heavy truck groans us. The metal brakes shriek as they fight the wet asphalt. The entire chassis shivers, sliding sideways for 3 terrifying seconds before coming to a halt just 2 feet away from the stranger. The headlights bathe the man in an intense, blinding glare. He is not a hitchhiker. He wears an expensive tailored suit, now ruined and clinging to his thin frame. In his right hand, he grips a heavy black leather briefcase with a brass combination lock. Before Thomas can even open the window to shout, the stranger rushes to the passenger side. He bangs his fists against the metal door. His eyes are wide with a primal terror that no amount of money can hide. Unlock it. Please, for the love of God, unlock the door. Thomas hesitates for a single heartbeat. He remembers his truck, his rules. But the desperation in the man's voice overrides his caution. He reaches across the seat and throws the latch open. The man flings himself inside, bringing a wave of cold rain and the sharp scent of expensive cologne mixed with fear. He slams the door behind him and immediately drops to the floor of the cabin, hiding below the dashboard line. Drive. Do not ask questions. Just put your foot on the gas and get us out of here right now. Thomas does not move his foot to the accelerator. He stays neutral. Who are you? And why are you running in the middle of a flash flood? The man raises his head just enough to look at Thomas. His face is twisted with a mix of terror and deep, systemic arrogance. It does not matter who I am. Look at this dashboard. Look at this junk you are driving. The man reaches into his wet pocket and pulls out a thick leather wallet. He pulls out a handful of $100 bills, soaking wet, and slaps them onto the dusty tableau. There is at least $3,000 there. Take it. That is more than you make in 3 months of hauling trash. Just drive, old man. If they catch us, we are both dead men. Thomas looks at the wet money on the dashboard. The ink is slightly running under the green cabin light. He does not touch a single bill. His expression remains as still as granite. Keep your money, Mister. My truck does not run on fear. Before the stranger can reply, a sudden glare hits the side mirrors of the truck. Two pairs of blinding LED headlights appear at the bottom of the mountain pass. They are moving fast, ignoring the dangerous curves, cutting through the storm like hunting dogs on a fresh scent. Two black SUV vehicles are accelerating up the incline. The stranger on the floor lets out a sharp, choked sob. They found. Oh God, they followed the signal. Thomas looks back at the road ahead, then at the mirror. The danger is no longer an abstract thought. It is 2 tons of armored steel gaining ground every second. The road ahead is a narrow, single-lane cliffside path with no guardrails for the next 10 miles. If he stays still, they will block him. If he goes, he carries a secret he does not understand into the darkest part of the night. Thomas shifts the heavy iron gear lever into fourth. The engine roars, a deep, mechanical growl that shakes the floorboards. The journey has begun. The rain continues to slash against the metal roof of the cabin. Thomas keeps his eyes locked onto the black ribbon of the highway. In the dark, the only source of light is the faint glow of the dashboard. It illuminates his face, etched with deep lines of time, exhaustion, and old memory. The stranger on the floor breathes heavily, his fingers white from gripping the leather briefcase. He looks up at Thomas, his eyes scanning the faded flannel shirt, the work boots, the thermos of cheap coffee. To a man who measures human value in stock options and silk ties, Thomas is invisible. He is just a shadow behind a steering wheel, a disposable part of a giant machine. The stranger sneers, wiping rainwater from his forehead with a trembling hand. You don't understand anything, do you, old man? You just drive back and forth, hauling crates, sleeping in dirty rest stops. You think you are being a hero by keeping me in this rust bucket? If those cars behind us get closer, your little rules won't save you. They don't care about a truck driver. They will bury you in the mud alongside this road, and nobody will ever look for you. Thomas shifts into a higher gear as the incline steepens. The diesel engine screams under the strain, fighting the weight of the cargo. He does not answer the man's insults. The silence in the cabin grows heavy, suffocating. Thomas does not need to explain himself to a man who bought his way out of every storm. He looks briefly at the small, faded photograph taped near the speed dial. A woman with a gentle smile, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. Sarah. It has been 7 years since the hospital room went silent. 7 years since the machine stopped ticking, leaving Thomas with nothing but an empty house and an old 5-ton truck. But before she closed her eyes for the last time, she held his rough hand. Keep your hands clean, Tom, she had whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. The world out there is full of people who cut corners and lose their souls for money. But you keep your promises. You don't look away when someone is drowning in the dark. Thomas takes a slow, deep breath, letting the memory anchor his heart against the rising panic in the cabin. He looks back at the side mirror. The 2 pairs of blinding LED headlights are no longer distant dots. They are closing the gap, cutting through the heavy curtain of rain like predators, closing in on a wounded animal. The stranger follows his gaze and lets out a panicked, choked gasp. They are catching up. Oh God, why aren't you driving faster? Push this piece of junk to the limit. I'll buy you 100 new trucks if you get me to the city. Just step on the gas. Thomas remains unmoved, his grip on the steering wheel steady and unyielding. Speed is not what saves you on Route 9, mister. It is knowing when to hold your ground. The road bends sharply to the left, hugging the edge of a massive rock wall. On the right side, there is nothing but a sheer drop into a black canyon filled with raging river water. The stranger buries his face in his hands, terrified of the abyss outside the window. He sees only the danger, the mud, and the terrifying scale of the storm. But Thomas sees something else. He sees the subtle shift in the mud on the asphalt. He hears the deep, changing vibration of the tires as they fight for traction on the loosening gravel. He knows every inch of this mountain, and he knows that the real battle has just begun. Suddenly, the lead black's SUV accelerates, pulling into the opposite lane. It draws parallel to the truck's driver's side door. The dark tinted window rolls down an inch, revealing the cold, glinting barrel of a weapon pointed directly at Thomas. The stranger screams, ducking deeper into the footwell. Thomas does not flinch. He locks his jaw, his eyes reflecting the harsh glare of the enemy's headlights. This is no longer a simple ride through a rainstorm. It is a choice between running away and standing firm on a promise made 7 winters ago. The heavy rain outside washes over the windshield, but inside the cabin, a different kind of storm is brewing. Thomas keeps his grip tight on the wheel as the shadow of the parallel SUV looms over them. The stranger on the floor has stopped breathing, his eyes frozen on the black barrel, visible through the glass. But before a trigger can be pulled, a massive wall of mud and loosened rock slides down the cliff face, directly ahead. It hits the asphalt with a deafening roar. Thomas doesn't panic. He uses his thumb to click the engine brake switch and yanks the wheel hard to the left, pivoting the truck's massive weight. The rear of the trailer swings out, acting as a giant steel shield. The SUV driver, blinded by the sudden slide and caught off guard by the truck's maneuver, slams on his brakes. The SUV spins out on the slick mud, its tires screaming as it slides into the mountain wall with a crunch of breaking fiberglass. Thomas guns the engine, forcing the 5-ton freighter through the narrow gap left by the debris. The danger is delayed, but not gone. The second SUV is already weaving through the fallen rocks, its high beams flashing aggressively in the rear view mirror. The stranger on the floor lets out a long, shuddering breath, shaking violently. You could have killed us. You didn't just dodge them, you fought back. Thomas doesn't look down at him. I didn't fight back, mister. I just know how this mountain moves when it rains. Now, sit up and tell me why those people are willing to die just to stop a broken-down truck. The stranger hesitates, his knuckles white against the leather of his briefcase. His elitist shell is cracking, but his pride still clings to the pieces. It's none of your business, drive. It's corporate finance. It's high-level restructuring. Things that happen in glass towers, not in a cabin that smells like grease. Just get me to the city limits, and you'll get enough money to never look at this road again. Thomas lets out a low, dry chuckle, a sound worn smooth by years of gravel roads. Corporate finance doesn't carry a weapon on Route 9 at 2 in the morning. Suddenly, the truck's dashboard radio crackles to life, static cutting through the silence. The speaker is loud, a voice dripping with local anxiety. Attention all units on the northern pass. We just got word. from the valley. The board of Apex Industry just signed the final foreclosure papers. The local mechanical foundry in Oak Ridge is shutting down at midnight this Friday. They are pulling the funding, citing systemic asset loss. Over 400 workers are getting their walk-in papers tomorrow morning. If you have a load near the valley, be careful. There are protests starting at the gates. The stranger's phone, tucked inside his wet jacket, suddenly lights up with a violent vibration. He pulls it out, his eyes widening as he reads a text message. Thomas catches a glimpse of the screen in the reflection of the glass. The message is short. The foundry is dead. Bring the audit papers to the harbor, or you join the list. The puzzle pieces in Thomas's mind slide into place with a sickening click. His own older brother, Arthur, has spent 32 years at that exact foundry in Oak Ridge. Arthur's hands are bent from arthritis, his lungs dust-worn from the furnaces, all to pay for his daughter's medical treatments. And this man sitting on his floor, holding a locked briefcase, is the one carrying the verdict. Thomas feels a cold, heavy anger settle deep in his chest. The truck slows down slightly as they enter a long, dark tunnel cutting through the mountain core. He pulls the gear shift back, the engine dropping to a low, ominous rumble. The foundry in Oak Ridge, Thomas says, his voice dropping an octave, steady and cold as winter stone. That asset loss they talked about on the radio. It isn't real, is it? The stranger stiffens, his breath catching in his throat. He looks up at the profile of the driver, suddenly realizing he isn't dealing with an ignorant tool. How do you know about that? Thomas stares straight ahead into the yellow lights of the tunnel. Because my family's blood is mixed into the concrete of that floor. Now open that briefcase. Let me see what my brother's life is worth on your paper. Thomas takes a sharp breath. He does not answer. Instead, his right hand slowly reaches for the mechanical lock on the glove compartment. He pulls out a small, heavy brass key. He holds it out to the stranger without looking at him. Open it, Thomas commands, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. Open that case, or this truck stops right here on the tracks. The stranger stares at the tiny key in Thomas's rough palm. He swallows, hard, his polished facade, completely fracturing. His hands shake violently as he takes the key. The brass clicks loudly into the combination, lock of the black briefcase. Pop. The leather lid springs open, revealing stacks of clean, white legal documents. Right on top is an official corporate seal with the name, Apex Industries Global. The stranger's voice is barely a whimper now. My name is Julian. I am the senior financial auditor for Apex. This case doesn't just contain foreclosure papers. It contains the real ledgers. The foundry in Oak Ridge isn't losing money. It made a 24% profit margin last quarter alone. Thomas keeps his eyes on the road, but his jaw tightens so hard the muscles twitch. Then why shut it down? Julian looks down at the papers, his eyes filled with a hollow guilt. Because the land underneath the foundry sits on a massive deposit of premium rare earth minerals. The board wanted to trigger a fake bankruptcy. That way, they could legally terminate all 400 employment contracts without paying a single dollar in pensions or severance. They planned to demolish the structure by Monday and sell the land to an offshore shell company. I discovered the fraud 3 days ago. I tried to stop it internally. But the CEO, he didn't offer a bribe. He just showed me a photo of my family's house. So he runs. I took the original audit trail because it's the only thing keeping me alive. If they destroy this case, the foundry dies, and I disappear. Thomas listens to the words, each sentence hitting his chest like a physical blow. He thinks of his brother Arthur. Arthur, who spent 32 years breathing in metal dust, believing that his hard work would secure his daughter's future. It was all a calculated lie by men who have never had grease under their fingernails. The high beams of the second SUV flash violently inside the cabin again. They have cleared the mudslide. They are less than 50 yards behind, their engine roaring as they prepare to ram the rear bumper of the old truck. Julian panics, grabbing Thomas's arm. They are going to kill us. Turn the wheel, pull over, give them the case. It's just a job, old man. Your brother can find another job. Thomas violently shakes Julian's hand off his arm. He grips the wheel with both hands, his eyes burning with an intense, quiet fury. Sit down, Julian, Thomas says, his voice cutting through the noise of the storm. You spent your whole life looking at numbers on a screen. Tonight, you are going to see what happens when you try to steal from men who build this country. Thomas throws the gear shift into fifth, pressing the accelerator to the metal floor. The old freighter charges forward into the pitch-black night. The engine roars as Thomas forces the heavy truck through a narrow, unlit exit off Route 9. This is not a regular road. It is an old, abandoned logging trail, half swallowed by mud and thick pine branches that slam against the truck's metal sides. Behind them, the high beams of the remaining black SUV flash wildly through the trees, searching but losing ground. Thomas kills the truck's main headlights, plunging the cabin into near-total darkness, relying only on his memory of the terrain. He steers the giant vehicle into the hollow shell of an abandoned limestone quarry, a place hidden deep within the mountain's shadow. The truck comes to a halt beneath a massive concrete overhang, shielding them from the torrential rain. The sudden silence is deafening, broken only by the ticking of the cooling exhaust pipe and Julian's ragged breathing. Julian looks outside into the pitch-black quarry, then looks at Thomas in utter disbelief. You turned off the lights. How did you know this place was even here? Thomas does not answer immediately. He reaches over, pulls a worn metal toolkit from under his seat, and grabs a heavy wrench. He opens his door and steps out into the cold, damp air of the quarry without saying a word. Julian, terrified of being left alone, scrambles out of the passenger side, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the thick mud. Wait. Where are you going? They are still out there looking for us. Thomas walks straight to the front passenger wheel, dropping down onto his wet knees despite the sharp pain in his joints. The impact from the mudslide forced a heavy piece of jagged shale deep into the brake assembly. The metal is smoking, emitting a hot, acrid scent of burning oil and friction. If I don't bleed the air lines and clear this rock now, the brakes will lock up completely on the next downhill slope, Thomas says, his voice flat, his hands already covered in dark grease as he works. And on this mountain, no brakes means you become a ghost before sunrise. Julian stands under the pouring rain, watching the older man work with absolute precision in the dim light of a pocket flashlight. He looks at Thomas' grease-stained hands, the quiet focus on his face, and the total absence of fear. For the first time, Julian looks down at the wet $3,000 still sitting on the dashboard inside the cabin. The money feels heavy, dirty, and completely useless out here. All his wealth, his corporate status, and his legal degrees cannot fix a broken brake line in the middle of a storm. His life depends entirely on the honor and the skilled hands of a man he had called an old fool just an hour ago. Julian's shoulders sink, the last remnants of his arrogance finally washing away into the mud. "I'm sorry," Julian whispers, his voice trembling, barely audible over the sound of the wind. "I spent years sitting in air-conditioned offices, drawing lines through people's lives to make the balance sheet look perfect. I never thought about who was actually at the other end of those numbers. I never thought about men like your brother." Thomas pauses his wrench for a fraction of a second, then delivers a hard blow to the shale, shattering the rock into pieces. He stands up, wiping his hands on a rough rag, his eyes locking onto Julian's pale face. "The world doesn't run on balance sheets, Julian. It runs on promises. Now get back in the cab." The air lines are clear, but I can hear the engine of their car looping back toward the main trail. We have exactly 4 minutes before they find the entrance to this track. The tiptuk zyankikban YouTube viral zaitepteofonkak, emotional drama storytelling, zuachen concept to os, shuyen, the last truck of truth. Zuidailafan noizung tipteo. Part 6, the steel, wall, and the radical shift. Duktit ke huan tuan bang van ban tuan tui. Gat zaun chun sakto iucho zaun dauk voiceover, TTS. Vabam chat magtang tien kang tang kwa kauchuen. A 1. Text voiceover thun part 6, the steel wall and the radical shift. Thomas yanks the gear lever back into fourth. The 5-ton truck roars as it breaks out of the quarry trail, sliding back onto the wet asphalt of Route 9. Behind them, the high beams of the second black SUV cut through the sheets of rain. The distance between them is disappearing fast. 40 yards. 30 yards. Julian grips the dashboard with both hands, his knuckles turning white as the headlights behind them flood the entire cabin with blinding light. They are going to ram us. They are going to push this truck over the cliff. Thomas looks at the rear-view mirror, his expression completely calm, but his right thumb slowly reaches for the old, heavy microphone of the CB radio hanging beside the wheel. He presses the talk button. Static hisses loudly through the small speaker. "This is Timberwolf on the Northern Pass," Thomas says, his voice flat, clear and steady, despite the roar of the engine. "I have a heavy load of truth in my bed, and the wolves are at the tailgate. I need a wall on mile marker 14. For 3 seconds. There is nothing but the crackle of static and the sound of the rain beating against the windshield. Then a deep, gravelly voice breaks through the radio. "Copy that, Timberwolf. This is Iron Bear. We hear you loud and clear. Hold your line." Suddenly, the black SUV accelerates, its engine screaming as it attempts to pull up alongside the truck's passenger side to force them into the rock wall. But before the vehicle can clear the truck's rear bumper, 2 massive sets of air horns blast through the midnight storm. From the dark entrance of a runaway truck ramp just ahead, a massive 18-wheeler, flatbed semi-truck lunges forward. It doesn't speed. It doesn't swerve. It simply occupies the entire left lane, its massive steel trailer blocking the road like a fortress wall. The driver of the SUV slams on his brakes, his tires smoking against the wet road as the vehicle spins violently, barely missing the semi-truck's massive tires. But the wall doesn't stop there. From the dark curves ahead, another heavy tanker truck pulls out from a shoulder lane, shifting its weight to close off the right side of the highway. Within seconds, 4 more massive commercial trucks appear from the darkness, their yellow clearance lights glowing through the fog. They move with perfect, silent coordination, a brotherhood of the road that needs no written orders. They form a moving box of solid steel around Thomas' old freighter, completely isolating the black SUV in a cage of rolling iron. The SUV is trapped, its high beams buried uselessly against the mud-splattered rear doors of a giant container truck. Julian looks out the rear window, then looks at the trucks surrounding them, his mouth open in absolute shock. They are protecting us. They are putting their own rigs on the line for a 5-ton junk truck. Thomas releases the radio microphone, letting it swing gently on its cord. They aren't doing it for the truck, Julian, Thomas says, his eyes fixed on the lights of the valley opening up ahead. They are doing it because every single one of those drivers has a brother, a cousin, or a father working in the Oak Ridge foundry. You thought you were just deleting names from a computer screen in your glass tower. But out here on the blacktop, those names have faces, and they have a family that watches their back. The stranger looks down at the open briefcase on his lap, the white papers glowing under the green dashboard light. The realization hits him like a physical blow, stripping away the last remnants of his corporate pride, leaving only the raw weight of his conscience. Inside the rolling fortress of steel, the atmosphere shifts completely. Julian slowly climbs back onto the passenger seat, his hands resting flat on the worn vinyl. He looks through the windshield at the flashing yellow markers of the leading semi-truck. He looks to the left, where the massive wall of a cargo container separates them from their pursuers. The cold, sterile world of high finance has vanished. Out here, the heavy diesel fumes and the violent vibration of the cabin feel real. They feel heavy. Julian looks at the black briefcase open on his lap, its white pages slightly stained with a stray drop of muddy rainwater. He reads the name on the corporate seal once more. Artut. Over 400 other names, all typed neatly in alphabetical order, each one marked with a red strike-through line. To the board of directors, those lines meant a higher stock valuation on Monday morning. But to Julian, looking at the scarred, calloused hands of Thomas gripping the wheel, those lines now feel like blood. He swallows hard, his throat tight with a sudden, suffocating wave of shame. He drew those lines, Julian says, his voice breaking, barely a whisper, over the steady hum of the engine. I sat in the boardroom and argued that terminating the pensions early was the most efficient way to clear the debt. I told them it was just data legacy. I didn't think about the families, or the old men who wouldn't be able to buy medicine. Thomas does not glance at him. His eyes remain locked onto the bright headlights of the valley road ahead. Data legacy don't keep the lights on in a home, Julian. A man spends 30 years staring into a furnace, believing his loyalty means his kids won't have to starve when his knees give out. You don't get to erase that loyalty with a click of a button because some billionaire wants a bigger boat. Julian feels a hot tear cut through the dried mud on his cheek. He reaches into the briefcase, pulls out a black pen, and flips to the final page of the audit trail. Right there, beneath the fraudulent liability statement, he signs his full name in clear, bold strokes. He adds the private access codes to the offshore shell accounts. The ultimate proof of the corporate theft. If we make it to the city, this document will freeze every asset Apex owns within 1 hour, Julian says, his voice growing steady for the first time. They won't just look at the numbers. They will have to look at the crime. Thomas looks at the side mirror, seeing the lights of the highway patrol depot appearing at the bottom of the pass. The cage of steel trucks begins to widen, smoothly parting to let the old 5-ton freighter take the lead. The storm is finally breaking, the heavy downpour turning into a thin, gray mist as the morning sun attempts to pierce the horizon. "Hold on to that case, Julian," Thomas says, his hand shifting the gear lever one final time. We are entering the valley. The early morning mist hangs low over the courtyard of the Oak Ridge District Court. It is precisely 10 minutes before 6 o'clock. The heavy tires of the 5-ton truck crunch against the gravel as Thomas brings the vehicle to a halt right in front of the main stone pillars. Behind him, the wall of commercial trucks lines up along the perimeter, their engines idling in a deep, unified rumble that fills the entire square. Julian sits upright in the passenger seat, his hand steady as he grips the signed leather briefcase. The fear that had paralyzed him in the mountain pass is gone, replaced by a quiet, absolute resolve. A group of senior federal investigators and local factory delegates, including Thomas' brother Arthur, are already standing on the steps, their faces tight with exhaustion and despair. Arthur looks at the muddy truck, then his eyes widen as he recognizes his brother behind the wheel. Thomas throws the door open and steps down, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy, solid thud. He turns to Julian and nods once. It is time. Julian steps out of the cabin, walks up the granite steps, and lays the black briefcase flat on the investigator's table. He snaps the brass locks open. "These are the original financial trails of Apex Industries," Julian announced, his voice echoing clearly across the courtyard. "The foundry in Oak Ridge is highly profitable. The bankruptcy is a corporate fabrication designed to unlawfully strip 400 families of their livelihood. My signature and the offshore account routing codes are on the final page." The lead investigator flips through the legal documents, his expression transforming from skepticism to total shock as the weight of the evidence becomes clear. He immediately picks up a secure phone line, issuing an emergency injunction. "Freeze all assets belonging to the Apex Executive Board, effective immediately. Stop the demolition orders for the Oak Ridge facility." Arthur stands frozen on the steps, a single tear cutting through the dust on his lined face as he realizes the factory is saved, his community is protected, and his family's future is secure. He looks at Thomas, his eyes filled with a deep, wordless gratitude. Julian turns to Thomas, offering his hand, his posture now carrying a genuine humility. "You saved my life, Thomas. And you saved this town." Thomas looks at the offered hand, then shakes it with his rough, callosed palm. "I didn't save the town, Julian. The truth did. You just chose to finally carry it." Thomas does not wait for the press, the corporate lawyers, or the celebratory crowds. He walks back to the cabin of his old truck, his joints aching from the long, brutal night. He sits behind the steering wheel, ignoring the wet $3,000 still sitting on the dashboard. He reaches out, gently takes the stack of bills, and places it neatly inside the glove compartment, intending to donate it entirely to the community clinic in Oak Ridge. He looks at the faded photograph of Sarah taped to the dashboard. The green light catches her gentle smiles. "We kept the promise, Sarah," Thomas whispers, his voice barely louder than a breath in the quiet cabin. The hands stayed clean. He turns the key, and the old diesel engine roars back to life, a steady, honest sound that has measured his life for 20 winters. The convoy of commercial trucks blasts their air horns in a grand, symphonic salute as Thomas shifts the gear lever into fourth and slowly pulls out of the courthouse square. The sun finally breaks through the gray mountain clouds, bathing Route 9 in a brilliant, golden light. The asphalt is clean now, the mud washed away by the storm. Thomas drives forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon, ready for the next mile, the next load, and the endless road ahead. Because a man's worth is never measured by the suit he wears or the wealth he accumulates. It is measured by the weight of his word and the strength of his soul when the dark night comes.